All right, we're back. Sorry about that. I had to pause for a second and edit out something that happened with my son. So we're back to chapter 19, now we're part 4. And the last feature we'll talk about here are wave cut benches. And what happens here, if you have an area of land that is underwater at high tide but exposed at low tide, then the waves can actually erode this coast only half of the time. It gets almost like this shelf, which is half water. It's sometimes dry, sometimes not. Now, what's neat about these wave cut benches, and let me get to the next one. If something happens to create a wave cave bench, but if something happens over time to geologically lift up the crust, and that happens, this wave cut bench, which is half the time underwater, now is permanently dry, gets exposed. It's called a marine terrace. So here in Scotland, here is a current wave cut bench. But here, this marine terrace, you can tell that it was underwater at some time in its past, and we can find traces of this. And then the last thing are cliffs. So cliffs, right, the rock right in the water, can retreat. And that doesn't mean the cliffs actually march backward, but what happens is as we have erosion. The waves are breaking against the cliff over time. Some parts may be weaker, it breaks away. And if you have that breakaway underneath, you get cliff retreat. And it looks kind of like this. So here was a cliff, and the water just basically ate away underneath it, and it back just wore it out. So the last part of this is going to be we're talking about beach nourishment, the Sisyphus stone. So I'm not sure if you've ever heard the story of Sisyphus. It was a Greek myth. He was this man that was cursed for this job for eternity. He had to roll a ball up a hill, and when he got to the bottom of the hill, the ball rolled down, and he had to start over. So this was his curse because it was a never-ending task, and beach nourishment is often seen that way. So beaches erode all the time, but if we have an issue like a storm, like we talked about Hurricane Sandy, where you have these huge storm surges, very strong hurricanes, sometimes beaches can erode overnight and be gone. So during Hurricane Sandy, almost 100% of all the beaches in Jersey were severely damaged. Some were completely eroded all the way. Some were 50 to 100 feet less. Here's a good example. This beach right here, this barrier island, storm surge carved this channel right through it, washed away this whole neighborhood and half of these houses. And this isn't even the worst of it. So, right, that's beach erosion. Now, how do we address this? How do we fix it? Well, the first thing is, if we don't let people build on the beach, then it's not going to matter, right? If there's no houses or buildings to destroy because there's no one building there, then it's not really a disaster, right? We talked about that. Hurricanes happen, but what makes them disasters is when they interact with people. Or, second option, we could modify the coastline with hard structures like groins, seawalls, jetties, these huge concrete, steel, and brick things that we build to kind of keep the beach in place. It can be very expensive, but it also can really destroy the character of the beach. So the last option is beach nourishment. If the beach isn't getting the sand it needs naturally, then we take that place and we basically artificially or nourish the beach with sand. Okay? So this can be done on a one-time basis, and that's actually what they did after Hurricane Sandy. Just brought in huge truckfuls or bargefuls of sand and dumped it in there and put it back. But usually, beach nourishment is an ongoing process because the process that was keeping sand from being put there, something has stopped sediment from entering the water the way it used to. And a storm maybe made it worse, but that problem is still there. So some beaches are continually nourishing. And one of the most common ways they do that is they literally just suck the sand up offshore with a big, huge vacuum cleaner and pump it back. But all things being said, most beaches only last 5 years before they need another top off. So here's an example. Here, about a mile offshore, this ship has a big, huge pipe that sticks down to the bottom of the water, and it sucks up the sand and pumps it here with the water, and it's dumped right here. And all the water flows back out, and now this new sand is popped here. And this is nourishing the sand that gets eroded back into the water. Lasts on average 5 years. Here's Virginia Beach. This beach, as you can see right here, in about 50 years was nourished roughly almost 50 times, on average once a year. Otherwise, it would be wearing away. Now, first of all, the pros and cons. So why do we do this? Well, first of all, even beyond the pros and cons, think about this. Why do we care about this beach? Well, you see that maybe there's a big hotel here, so there's tourism dollars. Virginia Beach is a resort city. If they didn't have a beach in Daytona, Florida, how many people would go there? In fact, think about Florida. They were so much dependent on the dollars created by tourists coming to the beaches that they didn't even close the beaches this spring break during the coronavirus outbreak because it was such a huge loss of money. And they're actually opening beaches again because they are more worried about losing tourism dollars than their own lives. That's my little editorial comment. So let's look at this on a let's do a checklist. The pros, right? It resets the problem. It does fix it, but the con only by a few years, and it doesn't address the issue that was causing it to happen anyway. Here's another con. It's expensive. It costs a lot. But here's a pro. Many livelihoods are maintained by this. People who work in the vacation or the tourism industry, if you go to Daytona Beach, you stay at a hotel. So the people who work there have a job. You eat out at restaurants. And the large parts of the country are hugely dependent on this. So that's why, even though it's an expensive process, there really isn't an option for a lot of areas. So it will continue. So let's talk about this. And this will be part of our discussion most likely. It usually is part of the last discussion question. Is think about Chicago's beaches. Chicago's beaches are completely artificial. There were no real big, wide, sandy beaches when the Europeans came here to settle here in the 1800s. Most of the beaches were more rocky, like you go to Wisconsin, or they were bluffs, like up by Gurnee. So Chicago's city park department actually brings in sand every year. And it's not been a problem except for the last year. If you've noticed, the last 2 years, Lake Michigan is higher than it's been in the past 20 years. So higher water means there's more waves that come in further, and we've actually seen beaches erode and wash away. We've lost, last I checked, there were 2 beaches that have gone on the far north side of the city in Rogers Park. They've been washed away, and the city dropped in huge amounts of boulders just to stop it from eating away and causing buildings to fall into the water. But the beaches are gone. And so, will those beaches come back? That's an issue to be seen. It's expensive. But that's part of the pros of living in Chicago, is that we have these beaches, right? So it goes back and forth. So thank you very much for watching this lecture. I know that you were rapt in attention to the very end, and thank you much. Have a good night.